And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if I move my desk slightly to the left, will that force my office mate to finally feel obligated to offer me a cigarette? And with Ukrainians and their president bravely resisting the Russian invasion, will Putin have the guts to take on Zelensky in a highly suggestive leather-clad dance-off? And now, the podcast host who would never refuse a dance-off challenge as long as he's wearing running shorts, Pete Dominic!
Yes, because I know what I look good in, and the answer is running shorts. Thank you, Pete Co. Thank you for pressing play on today's episode of Stand Up, featuring three excellent guests. Not one, not two, three excellent guests. And I'm very happy that all three of them were able to join me. I got Melissa Walker from the States Project, joins me for the first time to talk about why state elections matter so much. And then I am going to be talking with Bill B. of D.C., the Insider's Insider, talking about all things Ukraine. And before that, and first, I've got Nayyera Hawk of Black News Channel, the Black News Channel. Nayyera Hawk and I go way back. We were on Real Time together on HBO with Bill Maher, and then she would be on The Old Show and guest host for me, and love Nayyera. So three great guests. The order, I should say, is Nayyera, Melissa Walker, and then Bill B. in D.C. You want to know what time each guest comes on? You can look at the show notes on the podcast platform that you're listening on, or if you're a subscriber to Stand Up, it's in the daily email as well. So how are we doing? How are you doing? Happy March, everybody. Today is the first day of March, the third month of the year being 2022, and it's going to be the spring before you know it. Spring equinox on the 20th. It's Fat Tuesday today. Ash Wednesday tomorrow, if any of those traditions mean anything to you. And here we are together in March. You've got Joe Biden's first State of the Union this evening, and apparently a whole bunch of Democrats are going to be responding, which seems like a pretty stupid idea, but that's happening tonight. They're not going to be wearing masks in the chamber, as well as almost anywhere else across the country, though the pandemic is still on. Kids under 5 can't get vaccinated, so a lot of people want to believe it's over, but it's not over, certainly not for everybody. But you also have a war that is underway in Ukraine, which is where so much of our media and attention and hearts are focused on. And I get to that with Bill B. in D.C. and Naira Hawk. I've got a whole bunch of audio to play for you. But before I get to that, some of the other stories I want to mention here. Time for The Last 24, brought to you by Stand Up with Pete Dominic listeners. I can't do this show without your support. Please sign up for a paid subscription right now. And welcome to all new subscribers. Several people signing up in the last week. Very excited to have you. And now here's some of the sound from the last 24 hours that isn't necessarily directly related to those top two issues that I just mentioned. Like this one, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has issued its most dire warning about climate change yet, finding, as usual, that the impacts of climate crisis are already significantly worse than predicted, driving poverty, hunger, disease, and species extinction. Yay! It found about 3.5 billion people, some half of the world's population, now live in areas deemed highly vulnerable to the ravages of the climate catastrophe. These greatest impacts will mainly affect populations that are least able to cope and that made the smallest contribution to the creeping calamity, of course. Antonio Guterres is the Secretary General of the UN. He said in announcing the latest report, quote, "I have seen many scientific reports in my time, but nothing like this. Today's IPCC report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of a failed climate leadership. The report notes numerous so-called, quote, hard limits. Those were physical changes that are so drastic that there's no way to reduce risks or avert the worst impacts. And speaking to Democracy Now!, here's climate activist Bill Mckibben highlighting the dual goals of energy independence and greenhouse gas reduction that would come with getting our economy off fossil fuels, including the oil and gas propping up Vladimir Putin's war machine."
The Secretary General of the UN's words this time underscore just how shaken he is and anybody else who's paying attention. The world's biggest polluters are guilty of arson of our only home. That's not the kind of language that we would have heard even a few years ago out of the world's top diplomat. We're at a breaking point. And as he makes clear, the window we have for action is now narrow and closing. There are scientists who think that it may have already closed, but this report says that we have a little bit of time to accomplish enormous things. And that means, and this goes to this other topic that's dominating our lives today, and rightly so, that means that when we have moments like this that throw the world into stark illumination, we have to seize them. The same fossil fuels that are destroying the planet are precisely the thing that underwrite the power of thugs like Vladimir Putin. And we need to figure out quickly how to take that power away before it destroys free nations, before it destroys the ecosystem of the one planet we've got.
Well, that was horribly terrifying and depressing. So if you're paying a lot of attention to the news, you're probably thinking a good bit about nuclear war, and now you're thinking about the climate crisis as well, and it all gets pretty dire from there. So I highly recommend that you stay paying attention to the news. You take breaks, of course, but you stay focused on the moment and what you can do to make any situation, your situation, better. If not, just make someone else smile. My daily mindfulness practice, it's really what helps keep me sane, given all of the crazy stuff that I'm talking about here with you on the show and we're always hearing about and experiencing in our own daily lives. So finding the joy, that's what I'm doing between news stories here. And speaking of finding the joy, New Yorkers are finding the joy because we're being demasked. Here is the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, announcing the lifting of statewide mask requirements effective Wednesday, March 2nd.
Given the decline in our rates, our hospitalization, strong vaccination rates, and the CDC guidance, my friends, the day has come. Today we are going to be announcing that we'll be lifting the statewide mask requirement in schools, and that'll be effective this Wednesday, March 2nd.
Well, most New Yorkers are singing praise and saying, Hallelujah! Though some people think it's still too early with the numbers and under-vaccinated and kids under 5 not vaccinated. I know some of my daughter's teachers aren't planning to take off their masks, apparently, and you can still wear your mask. You can still have your kid wear their mask. I know some parents are still going to have their kids wear their masks as well. So you have that choice, but you're not going to be forced to. And at least we won't be yelling about that at the Board of Education meeting, I hope, any longer. And then we'll just be arguing about diversity, equity, inclusion, and everything else. Speaking of race and racism, here is the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, on the last day of Black History Month.
So, friends, Black History Month was established to teach the history that too often has not been taught. The history of Black excellence and leadership in America. And also the history of resistance and resilience in America. And we are clear, Black history is American history. It is living, breathing history. History we create every day.
And now the same can be said for Women's History Month, which is beginning today, March 1st, commemorating, encouraging the study, observance, and celebration of the vital role of women in American history. All right, well, now let's get to all that sound I've got around Ukraine and what I am calling Putin's war, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. First, here is Ukrainian member of parliament Oleksiy Gunnercharenko calling for an embargo of Russian oil and gas on Fox News yesterday.
We need an embargo on Russian oil and gas because now Russian oil and gas is full of Ukrainian blood. More than 350 civilians are killed, 16 children are killed, and their blood, their innocent blood, is inside Russian gas and oil. So embargo, ban on Russian gas and oil, that is something from moral point of view, but certainly from a practical point of view too, because Russia is just a big gas station of the world. 2/3 of their export is oil and gas. 1/2 of revenues of the Russian state budget is gas and oil. So let's stop it, and you will see that Putin will surrender just in the days. And that will enormously help not only us, but the whole world.
And here now is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
The escalation of military operations by the Russian Federation in Ukraine is leading to escalating human rights violations. We know the inevitable result of war: civilian casualties, women, children, and men forced from their homes, hunger, poverty, and huge economic disruption. Conflict is the utter negation of human rights across the board. Freedom of expression is under attack, with reports of journalists and activists arrested. I have consistently called for the end of the offensive and the return to the paths of dialogue and diplomacy. Meanwhile, our human rights monitoring mission in Ukraine is continuing its work, and our humanitarian agencies will step up their operations. We must show all people in Ukraine that we stand by them in their time of need.
All right, that's the UN Secretary General yesterday. Now, here is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. His name is Bill Taylor. And, of course, he testified during the Trump administration over that horrible phone call the president made trying to extort the president of Ukraine, who is now seen as a hero for the way he handled that and the way he's handling this horrible crisis. Anyway, here is Bill Taylor. He was on MSNBC's Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace yesterday.
Ambassador Taylor, was diplomacy a ruse? I mean, could Putin have been reasoned with, or was this, from Putin's perspective, preordained?
We tried. There's no doubt that the West tried, that President Biden tried, that NATO tried. We put things on the table that would address some of Putin's stated concerns about his security concerns. So there was that effort. I think it was a genuine effort. What appears to be the case now is Putin was never interested. He was never interested. He was not worried about sanctions. He was not worried about the costs that we said he was going to feel, and he's going to feel them. He was not worried about that. He has been intending, it's almost clear, to do this in any case. So it was not a ruse on our side. It could have been on his.
All right, also on Deadline White House, Julia Ioffe, who has been just about everywhere doing amazing work and earning the respect that she already had from me and so many others with a much wider audience. Here she is also on Deadline White House yesterday for 2 minutes, the great Julia Ioffe.
I haven't asked because I don't know if there is a reliable set of numbers of lives. Do you have a number of lives lost on either side, or of humans injured on either side?
I think a lot of those figures are coming from the governments themselves and are not always reliable. I think the Russians for a long time were saying that there were 0 casualties, while the Ukrainian government was saying, as of a couple of days ago, that the Russians had lost something like 3,500 men already. The Russians said 0, but now they're saying some are missing in action. So I think we're going to have to wait a while until something more reliable comes out. But it seems that it's becoming bloody. What I was going to say in response to your question is, what I'm worried about watching Twitter and watching American TV is Americans love an underdog story. The Ukrainians are so lovable and brave, and they're totally winning the informational war with these incredible videos and memes, and cursing out Russian warships, even at risk of certain death. But it's only been 5 days, and the fight ahead is a long one. And as you saw in Kharkiv today, there's a reason that so many of us got worried when we saw that. That's what we've been expecting. And we expect to see a lot more of that because, and I personally do, because I just don't see how Putin backs down on this. He doesn't like to lose. He doesn't like to back off. And he certainly is not going to be humiliated militarily by what he sees as a small, weak, and failed state. So I worry that this is going to be something like a Chechnya or a Syria scenario where he levels cities or carpet bombs civilian areas. And we started to see that in Kharkiv today. And also, I think even if they do seize the country, I don't know that that means they win, because clearly the 40 million plus Ukrainians are not going to take that sitting down. We're going to see a lot of we're going to see a long, bloody, grinding insurgency.
Continued sobering, passionate, and very credible analysis from Julia Yaffe, Russian speaker at Puck News. She's a founder of that news organization. Definitely follow her on Twitter. And I really should reach out and get her on. I just feel like she's been in such demand with the highest profile shows, and I'm always happy to play the clips. But we go way back. I should reach out to her and at least let her know she's doing great work. All right, let's go to Jen Psaki and the White House briefing yesterday.
Well, President Putin has been one of the greatest unifiers of NATO in modern history. So I guess that is one thing we can thank him for.
All right. She also had this to say about Russia using cluster and vacuum bombs, as they call them, against Ukrainian civilians.
There are reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians. If that's true, what is the next step of this administration? And is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime?
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime. Obviously, there are a range of international fora that would assess that. So certainly we would look to that to be a part of that conversation.
I just have to say about that, it's absolutely horrible. And the fact that the International Criminal Court is already considering charges against Russia for using these weapons is good. But condemnation of cluster munitions with no mention that we, the United States, dropped thousands of them on Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, horrible, but nobody seemed to care nearly as much about our use of white phosphorus. Just a tremendous use of it. Killed thousands of people, including non-combatants, in the most horrifying ways. And context, I think, matters. And it just irks me. It continues to irk me that we didn't seem to have the same criticism of our own usage of these weapons in Iraq and Afghanistan. And yet we're condemning Russia for using them. I don't know. I guess if you disagree with me bringing that up, I'd love to hear from you, but I can't stop thinking about that. All right, one more clip from Jen Psaki yesterday in the White House briefing room. Here she is responding to the Russian ambassador saying the U.S. is expelling 12 Russian diplomats was a hostile act, apparently.
The United States informed the United Nations and the Russian mission to the United Nations that we were beginning the process of expelling 12 intelligence operatives from the Russian mission who had abused their privileges of residency in the United States by engaging in espionage activities that are adverse to our national security. So it takes some time to make those evaluations, and that, again, those actions were in the works for a month.
And your response to the Russian ambassador who called this a hostile act?
I think the hostile act is committing espionage activities on our own soil.
All right, well, now let's get to just a couple more responses in relation to this. Here's the governor of Florida. His name is Ron DeSantis, of course. He says that Putin is a bad guy. Let's listen to DeSantis on Putin.
This is a guy who's basically an authoritarian gas station attendant, okay, with some legacy nuclear weapons from the old Soviet Union. Their whole society is hollowed out except for that energy. And so if you want to hit him at the gas pump, hit him with energy. Okay, well, all right. Well, let me move on to another Republican governor who had some comments on this. It is Governor Greg Abbott, who is a lot more focused on the border of Mexico and America than the one on Russia and Ukraine. Can't think about both of them, of course, at the same time.
Over the past 2 weeks, there have been 15 people apprehended coming across the Texas border from Russia. I tell you what, if the president is so focused on this border between Russia and Ukraine, he should be focused on the border between the United States of America and Mexico.
All right. Yeah.
Woo. Because he has failed in his job, Texas has stepped up.
Okay. Well, there he is. Governor Greg Abbott. Can Beto O'Rourke beat him? That's the big question I have for you Texan listeners. Now let's check in with the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Her name is Linda Thomas Greenfield. After Russia's veto of the Security Council resolution condemning Russia's aggression in Ukraine.
You can veto this resolution, but you cannot veto our voices. You cannot veto the truth. You cannot veto our principles. You cannot veto the Ukrainian people. You cannot veto the UN Charter, and you will not veto accountability. Responsible members of this Security Council have stood together today in the face of Russia's aggression, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine, supporting it in every way we can.
And how about this? I'll play a Howard Stern clip. I don't usually see Howard Stern clips, but this is just 2 minutes of Howard Stern and a satisfying rant weighing in on the Ukraine-Russia, or the Russia invasion of Ukraine, sounding off on Republicans for praising Russian President Vladimir Putin, and I like it.
Fucking moron, Vladimir Putin. I do want to make a few comments about Ukraine. I mean, the obvious stuff. I hate the Soviet Union. I hate the communist regime. I always hated communism because it always turns into an autocratic situation like in China where they cut off your freedoms. I hate the fact that I don't know what I used to love the Republicans and their stance is firmly anti-communist, firmly pro-capitalist, anti-communist, and certainly a staunch defender of free people and free elections. I voted for many Republicans. I don't see how I'll ever get back to that. They've just totally disappointed me in their support of Vladimir Putin, the praise they heap on him, Trump's praise of Vladimir Putin. This guy's a fucking animal. And I wish he was dead, like I wish Hitler was dead. I can't imagine the horror of the life of the Ukrainian people. They're living in a country. They decided to have free elections. They're trying to move toward freedom. Not their entire society wants to move toward freedom. Some of them want to stay tied to Russia, whatever. But they're acting out in some free way. And this scumbag, who has more money than anybody, who has more power than anybody, who enslaves an entire country, who will kill you if you're a journalist, will kill you if you speak out against him, who's got everything a man could want if you're truly a megalomaniac. And he didn't have enough. This hunger goes back, again, I'm going to speak like a psychiatrist, it goes back to not being loved as a child. He is a little boy who says, everything in this world is for me, and I'm going to gobble it all up for myself. That's all that's going on here. That's what's happening. We have a guy who feels like he's never full. He wants more and more.
Well, what do you think of that? I love that commentary. I mean, he's always psychoanalyzing everybody, Howard Stern, but he sounds a lot like Ruth Ben-Ghiat or Kenneth C. Davis, historians who have written a lot about strong men in the past and that psychology that Howard Stern is talking about there. Good stuff. All right, well, that's all of the audio that I gathered for you today, but I've got a lot more headlines coming your way. So it's time for what we call the news dump. Pete Coe with a brand new jingle.
Bike race in the home stretch, riders feeling chuffed. They didn't see that angry bull on today's news dump.
Oh dear, apparently a raging bull crashed a bike race and attacked 3 riders, and there is video of it. It's from California, and oh my God, I'm watching it. The bull, oh no, he tossed him in the air and into a ditch. Oh my goodness, that was absolutely horrible. I mean, I've watched it like 40 times. I even sent video of my narration of it to Pete Coe just now, and you've got to see that video. It's really crazy. I watched it at the New York Post. Google it. Raging bull crashes bike race, attacks 3 riders in a wild video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. All right, well, on to some more important and very serious news, folks. Again, brought to you by subscribers like you. If you haven't signed up, sign up now. Go to standupwithpete.com and sign up for a paid subscription so I can keep this going every day. All right, so Supreme Court Justice or nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson looks like a very highly qualified person for the job, but apparently there is one crack in her progressive armor. She, of course, is a very pro-union and has handed down several pro-union rulings, at least a couple which were sufficiently notable to capture national media attention, according to the On Labor news site, which is an awesome news site for organized labor. But there was this case from 2016 about the defense industry, Lockheed Martin employees citing unfair labor practices that apparently included discriminating against some black workers. But in this case, Judge Jackson took the unusual step of overriding the settlement reached between the two parties, claiming it was unfair to a giant weapons manufacturer. So that seems to be one of the only cases among Judge Jackson's hundreds of decisions that has any lefties particularly riled, putting Judge Jackson in a better progressive light than previous Democratic nominees in recent decades. All right, let's go to Kansas. What do we got here? A federal court on Friday struck down parts of a new Kansas law that criminalized the distribution of advanced mail ballot applications. The state agreed to not object to arguments raised by nonprofit organizations that said the 2021 law violates the First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Oh, and the state also agreed to not appeal the decision and will pay attorney fees and court costs of the plaintiffs. So, nice try, Kansas, to make it harder to mail in your ballot, but no cigar, sirs. Meanwhile, Texas, voting rights news. As that state prepares to vote on its first primaries day, authorities have rejected thousands of mail-in ballots due to the new Republican-enacted voter restrictions. That's right. The new Jim Crow laws in Texas taking effect, everybody. In Harris County, 40% of ballot applications were flagged for rejection, according to Democracy Now! Oh, and to that freedom convoy, the right-wing, quote, organizers, if you can call them that, they've announced the end of their freedom convoy. What happened? They couldn't get a sponsor? They couldn't get enough trucks? Well, it was headed to Washington, D.C. not long after leaving California, but citing a lack of participants. Sounds like one of my shows. I can relate. The launch in California had a good turnout of supporters, but only 5 trucks were with us on arrival in Vegas, the group said on Facebook. Even these claims were probably, folks, exaggerations. How about this? Nearly half of the people who voted for former President Donald Trump believe the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, is doing a better job than Joe Biden. Fuck Joe Biden, everybody. Let's go Brandon and Vladimir. According to a new poll from Yahoo News, YouGov, the total, only 76% of Americans were found to hold a negative view of Putin, with 47% of Trump voters preferring him to Biden. They prefer Putin to Biden. What does that say? What else have I got here for you? Transgender children and their parents in Texas are terrified after Governor Abbott, there, who I mentioned earlier, ordered the parents of kids who have transitioned be investigated for child abuse. Experts doubt that classifying gender-affirming care as child abuse would hold up in court, but families still feel targeted by the new order, which may be in effect until it's successfully challenged in legal proceedings. Keep your eye on that one. And disgraced actor Jussie Smollett and his legal team are seeking a new trial, even as they await sentencing on his humiliating first prosecution. They state they would also accept a summary not guilty verdict should the court be inexplicably in the mood to invalidate itself. Smollett claims his lawyers were not allowed to ask questions of potential jurors, and his defense claims the jury pool for the high-profile case was tainted. Turns out everyone in America knows Smollett is actually full of shit. Oh, and one more asshole I want to report on. A major executive of the Estee Lauder Company was forced out over a racist Instagram post. His name is John Dempsey. He was the executive group president. Apparently, he posted a spoof book cover of the children's TV show Sesame Street, which contained the N-word, with some letters replaced by asterisks, and he also went off on some COVID stuff, restrictions, just bad, and he apparently was forced out of the company. And one more news story I wanted to mention, Target adopting minimum wages as high as $24 an hour. How about that? A statement Monday. The Minneapolis-based retailer said the new minimum wage will range from $15 to $24, depending on the job and local market. And I think that's good news, right? Is that good news? Costco raised its hourly minimum wage from $16 to $17. Amazon starting wage is $15 an hour, with an average starting wage for transportation and fulfillment jobs of $18 an hour. Walmart boosted its hourly minimum wage for employees at $12 an hour, so they're still the cheapest, and no surprise there. Avoid Walmart if you can. How about that? All right, well, that is your news dump, brought to you by stand-up listeners like you. Sign up now, standupwithpete.com. Raise your subscription if you really get a lot out of the show and you can spare a couple more bucks. Go for it. People always do that, and it makes a huge difference, everybody. Okay, time to get to my first guest joining me. Like I said, I've got 3 excellent guests joining me today. Melissa Walker of States Project joins me, and the great Bill B in D.C. and I catch up on all things Ukraine. But first, it's been a while since I spoke with my friend Nayyera Haq. She is a brilliant analyst and awesome person, really funny, down-to-earth, good friend of mine. We met when we appeared together on Real Time with Bill Maher in March, I think, of 2018. She is now the chief foreign affairs correspondent and host of nightly newscast, The World Tonight, on the Black News Channel. She's also a SiriusXM talk show host. Previously, she served as senior director in the White House and senior advisor at the State Department, advising our nation's top leaders on issues of international security and diplomacy. You can read her at CNN.com, Refinery 29, The Root, and so much more. Follow her on Twitter as well, the Twitter handle in the show links. But I had a great conversation with her. It was so great to catch up. She's always been a huge supporter of mine and me of hers, and I love talking to her. We had a great conversation about it all. I hope that you like it. Here it is, Nayyera Haq, everybody. There she is, Nayyera. I'm so happy that I finally got to talk to you. You're very busy. You're on the set of the Black News channel, and I really appreciate you fitting me in. How are you?
I'm good, and it's really good to reconnect. Pete, you and I have not physically been in the same space since the pandemic, and it's just a reminder of, wow, how time has no meaning anymore. That's how I feel.
Well, that's not gonna change though, because I'm not planning on leaving the shed much in the new normal.
I could come join you in the shed one day. That would be fun. We do road trip.
Very small. I think you'd probably feel uncomfortable. I think you'd be like, you know what? You're in my space. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It's a shed.
Did you build the shed?
Yeah, I did, with the help of a couple of listeners. This is an old shed that was existing, and then we renovated the whole thing, I should say. So yeah, we did.
You've been ridiculously productive in the pandemic. I did. We were talking, I think last time I was maybe pregnant or had just delivered a baby. I have now successfully kept that baby alive. She's now 1.5 years old.
Yeah, you've been productive as well. You created a human. So, I mean, I insulated the shed. So I want to talk about a little bit about your life and your work, because you really do a good job at mixing them up on social media. I'm big into your brand. I think it's somewhat similar to mine in that you go on and you're very professional on network television appearances, with your work, with your writing, with all of it. But you also do share personal stuff on places like Twitter or in a conversation like this with me. And I wonder if what the reaction is to that, because it certainly makes you, I'll be cheesy and say, really likable. But it also, I feel brings someone like yourself a lot of credibility and trust in what you're saying when you do go on those, corporate media network appearances.
Thank you for that, because some of it was, in becoming that person who had all this experience and knowledge and wanted to share that with other people, being petite Asian woman of a sort, it does you start to come up against these barriers of, well, how do you present that in a way that is credible? National security spaces are stereotypical for older white men, retired stars on their shoulder kind of people. I'm like, well, I've been doing this for 15 plus years. I know what I'm talking about. But I have always wondered how it comes across on television. And, did I need to be wearing that jacket and have it be buttoned up and talk a little bit more like I'm a really responsible grown up and adult? I'm like, I'm never going to look. Now maybe it's a good thing, but there was a point in my career where always looking like I'm 15 years old was not helpful. When I get somebody that, no, really, this is what you should do when it comes to affairs of state. So helpful to hear that it does come across on television as credible. There is something very flattening about TV in that regard, where because we're all just kind of waist up and you don't know how short or tall anybody is. And so if you deliver with confidence, I think that helps. But it is an ongoing conversation about what we expect a national security expert, what we expect a television commentator or radio host to look like beyond what we expect them to sound like. And so I just kind of leaned into it. I'm like, I am who I am, right? I'm never going to be a retired 70-year-old white male general. So like, this is it. This is part of the thing. And in the pandemic in particular, which is when I started hosting full time, it was also just an outlet of relief to be like, check out how bonkers this is. I'm about to go on live radio and I got nobody to take care of this newborn baby. So I'm just going to pop her on the boob and we're just going to go for it. Because what else are you supposed to do right now? And Sean, instead of it being oh my God, you didn't find someone to take care of your baby. It was very like, awesome. Thanks for doing that. I'm like, I didn't know what else to do, right? Like I'm supposed to piece all these things together, working from home, being the mom of a newborn. I'm like, I do one thing though, Pete. I refuse to be Superwoman. Like my mom and her generation were like, we're going to do everything. We're never going to complain. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to take care of it. I'm like, no, absolutely not. There is always something to complain about when you're a working parent.
I love all of that. I love you hearing you just give permission to, I feel like a lot of women, especially who have gone through a similar experience as you. It's just like, most people, most women, if they're in a similar situation to you, their job, let's say they work in compliance at a bank or in HR at as a consultant, whatever, people aren't really seeing them do their work as much. I mean, more now, I guess, with Zoom and so on. But like you're going on TV or you're going on the radio. So people kind of see that. And then you get to hear about it in this conversation or on social media. And I love that. I will say this, though. I took notes while you were talking. You do identify as a petite Asian woman, but you also always, to me, have come off with, I don't know what petite Asian woman energy is, but I feel like you do come off sometimes or often with old white male general energy.
Well, and that's the training, right? That's like when you're in these rooms and that's all you talk about, you start to pick up a little bit on that. And it can be quite confusing. So I just go with disarming the listener at this point and intriguing them. Like, she sounds like the words she's using about sanctions for deterrence, right? Like those are fancy old men white words.
Well, you pick up on all of that language and lingo. And then I think the viewer, in this case, the listener, starts to think, oh, this person is in the same league as the other person. In this case, this petite Asian, this person who's not an old white male general can hang with that person. And it's been fascinating to see the conversation around that change, certainly now. But let's talk about the work that you're doing right now. You certainly are obviously eminently qualified to talk about all the geopolitics and foreign policy. And I want to talk a little bit about your background. But first, you are now working at this new network, which has been really successful. I'm hearing about it, seeing a lot of, really important, I think, and interesting things. But the Black News Channel, which is a 24/7 multi-platform programming dedicated, as they say on the website, to covering the unique perspectives, challenges, and successes of Black and brown communities, because, as they write, for far too long, people of color have been overlooked and underserved by the news media. Take it from there, Nayyera, and tell me about like the work you're doing and who's watching and what do you hear from the viewers?
It has been a fascinating experiment because there is this idea that there is an underserved market, which every business tries to find that underserved market and then super serve it, right? Like that's with the disaggregation of media, like find your niche and then go hard on that audience and help inform them. But it's also moved beyond just talking to Black and brown people and talking about the experiences and using that lens and seeing how that changes an editorial direction. And I suspect we have a lot of white listeners as well, just as other networks that may only look one way have a lot of different kinds of people who watch them. It really, I think, hit home for me when the network made a decision to cover wall to wall, give up everything, give up even commercials, no breaks, wall-to-wall coverage of the Derek Chauvin trial, really the justice for George Floyd. And you could watch that every day. The second time was when Ahmaud Arbery's murderers, now convicted murderers, the three white men from rural Georgia, right, who did the modern day lynching, watching that trial all day. And we were dipping in and out of Kyle Rittenhouse. Other networks did the flip. For them, it was more important to see what happens to this young white man with a gun. And for my network, it was more important to see, do old white men who modern day lynch do they get held accountable? And so that contrast to screens, I'm like, this is a very interesting experiment because it's where do you prioritize news placement, right? What's at the top of the show? What's at the bottom, right? What ends up getting more time? What gets less time? What are the words you use to describe it? So today and this week, yes, we do all of them. I'm hard in on Ukraine analysis, listening to the national security press meetings, reading those out, doing the commentary and the reporting. But also, we are looking at the fact that Africans living in Ukraine are blocked from leaving in the same way that white Ukrainians are. Right? These are Africans who are there as their citizens. Some of them are Ukrainians as well. And how are they being turned away or helped or facilitated across the border? We're also looking at the fact that some networks are calling this, and even Al Jazeera fell into this trap, which was fascinating to me, of saying that, well, the reason why the world cares so much about Ukraine and why Poland is accepting refugees is because, well, they look like us, right? They're blonde hair, blue eyed. This is a civilized city that has not been in conflict. So let's just pause and unpack that for a minute. That actually is probably a big part of, I think, why there is a lot of emotion around the engagement and involvement is the affinity and association with Europe. But the idea that Kyiv and Ukraine are civilized, but Syria is not, and that Ukrainian citizens are more desirable, not only is their GDP lower than Syria's, but Syrian refugees tended to be higher educated and have advanced degrees like engineering degrees. So they could have contributed to economies. Actually, that's why Germany was welcoming them. That's one. But the second part of the idea that they haven't seen conflict before. Putin invaded their country in 2014. They've been living under Russian militant attacks for the last 10 years. So it's also inaccurate. So the lens leads to different set of facts that people are trying to use.
All right. So you tweeted about this as well. Specifically, folks like yourself are looking at this through a different lens. And there are certain words, languages, and comparisons, as well as actual facts that folks are getting wrong. Mainstream corporate anchors who've been longtime conflict reporters or foreign correspondents even. But you say when you cover this beat, you know the trigger words. You know how language matters. You know recent history. You know how these conflicts originated through no fault of the regular people on the ground. And your commentary and reporting must reflect that. And then you make the point as to why there needs to be more diversity in national security, media, and policy. You represent that. Your network now represents that. What is the different perspective, different perspective you're bringing to this conflict right now?
It's also a generational perspective change, right? Like social media has allowed us to be so much more connected to everybody's personal experience. Like we were talking about that. People now know I'm trying to make peanut butter jelly sandwiches before I go on air to take care of my kid, right? Like we see all these different parts and we see all these different parts of conflicts too. So to hear somebody on the ground reporting that there's been no conflict in Kyiv, you're like, but wait a second, we've seen these facts. We've been hearing these facts. To hear and then see certain places called civilized, you start to wonder, well, who gets to define civilization? Mm-hmm. What does that even mean, knowing that it was like this place is civilized, unlike Iraq? I'm like, that was literally the cradle of civilization. Right? Like that, the definitions and the context and lens, that is fascinating to me to see how that hasn't changed for some people, but it has changed for another generation, specifically the generation that not only is digital natives, and I think that's also a change in reporting and generations, but also the generation that was raised in the shadow of 9/11, right? The 20-year forever war, similar to a sense of how the Vietnam War unfolded, but it fundamentally changed life for millennials, for Gen Z. And that is a key audience now, right? You need to speak to this generation, reflect them in your coverage. And, the country is only browning. And we all know that the browning of the country is part of what is freaking out some other folks. But that is the reality of what's happening. And so power dynamics, media, government, all of that either is going to be responsive to that generation or is going to be held to account for it.
Well said. I mean, you're talking about the browning of this country, but we could talk about the browning of Europe as well, where the similar concern for folks in those countries have traditionally been white and, So, I mean, we can talk about that and how that's being reported, too, in terms of the refugee crisis. Like, there's who is it in which Eastern European country? I don't want to get it wrong, where they're like,
It was Poland. There were some reporters standing in Poland saying, oh, well, this is so hard because this could happen to anyone. I mean, these people look just like us, blonde haired, blue eyed. I'm like, you just came out and said it, that your sympathy is not for a human being or a baby. It's for how you can emotionally connect to a person. And it's not because they're a human or a baby. You're emotionally connecting to them because of how they look. And I get that. Like, that is actually a very common thing. I find it fascinating to see that not only is it's saying the quiet part out loud, but to what degree, even people who are involved in these issues day to day, to what degree we all fall prey to that, and how, you got to unpack your biases.
Yeah, I mean, it's tribal, it's cultural. You understand, we can talk about all of that, but it's really great to hear you point to those biases.
But look at the consequence of it, right? The consequence is there's like 500,000 Ukrainians who will be safe and be taken care of, or at least feel welcomed. And you still have people in Syria, again, no fault. Their own government, their own dictator started bombing them, asked Russia and Iran for help to bomb them, and they got turned away. Like, they were dying on boats in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's the consequence of bias.
I want to ask for your analysis on all of it as well. What was the work that you did when you worked at the federal government, the State Department, Nayyera?
So I had a few gigs in government. I worked at the State Department as a spokesperson for largely overseas audience. And a large part of it was translating, this is what America is about. This is what we do. Here's what we're trying to help you with. And I came across a lot of the narratives about the United States not being an honest broker, the United States really being all about itself, a lot of which, of course, came true in the Trump administration. I also worked at the UN and the Pentagon in conflict areas on helping diplomats connect dots, try to get some resolution. But I was, for this conflict, the most relevant is the fact that I was in the UN, in the Security Council meetings with my then boss, trying to figure out how Russia was going to be held accountable for invading Crimea. And I saw firsthand that sanctions that did not hit him and did not hit his economy hard did not deter him from doing more. Right? We are here today because of what was not done 10 years ago.
There's a conversation amongst people, smart people like yourself, scholars that understand the history of sanctions and how they work and where they haven't. And people can argue about that all day. But I feel like what's happening now is more than just the harshest sanctions that we've seen. I feel like it's also like airline companies saying we're not even going to fly out of there, and banks saying we're not even going to allow you to use our messaging services, and other countries' pronouncements. I mean, I don't know if this is true. I don't know some of these things. I don't know if they bear out, but like the most popular pornography websites, like when you go to it now, it's like no porn for you or something.
And you just know that from reporting.
I do a lot of reporting on porn sites.
Yeah, that's why you know that. It's fascinating to see, and it is these actions, which are non-military actions, are effective when they're done in concert with other people. There's 130 countries now that are on board. Even the Swiss, the famously neutral people, are now on board with dumping Russian bank assets. They're also targeting key individuals of influence. So it's not just decision makers around Putin, but also the fact that there are wealthy bajillionaire oligarchs who benefit from being part of Russia, kind of in this in-between space, and they keep all their money overseas. They're being targeted now too. But it gets down to the idea of treating Russia now like the way the world has treated Iran and North Korea. Prior to this, because Russia had enough influence, it's the world's largest gas exporter. It had has a seat on the UN Security Council, a permanent seat. Right. So they can veto whatever they want and stop the world from doing things. All of that is now they're being isolated away from. And so, they're Putin and Russians are now looking at suddenly living life as if they were in North Korea. And that has to give them pause. I will say, though, 6,000 people already arrested in Moscow for protesting. So the Russian people are doing what they can, but they're at the subject of a megalomaniac. So we'll see that.
I feel like the next thing that might happen would be an internal uprising. I mean, if there's no money, or if their money's worth nothing, and if they're starving, at some point, when does that happen? What are we predicting for Russia, for folks living there?
That ends up becoming the big problem, right? Because you end up with people suffering because of the consequences of choices their leaders have made. Life is not good in Iran. However, the Iranian regime has managed also to sway public sentiment often in their own favor and saying, well, look, we are the victims of the evil West. Putin's likely to do the same thing, right? That is a reality. So that's the tension. Will the people rise up? Will they be able to, able to make that kind of change? It does force Putin to have to focus inward a little bit. So maybe he can be less aggressive overseas if he's dealing with all these problems at home. But there's nothing happy about this, right? That people will have a hard time finding food and making ends meet.
Yeah, that's an important way. I kind of ignorantly asked that question as a myopic, like if people are suffering, aren't they going to rise up against him? And what you're saying is the narrative that they're getting, and you mentioned Iran, is that the reason that they're suffering, the cause to blame is, of course, the West, NATO, obviously, most importantly, the U.S., and that unifies them behind Putin because he's able to tell that narrative given the fact of certainly the censorship on the media, right? That they don't even know what's happening in Kyiv. They think it's happening in those other provinces, which I can't pronounce.
What happens in Iran, they are, right, this is a formal military action. And so parents, family members see that their people, like their family members, are now on the border in a conflict. How many body bags will come home before this narrative changes that it is the West? And actually, well, no, it's Putin. This is a war that the Russians themselves did not ask for.
So I just want to then ask your analysis now of the domestic reaction to this. How do you feel about the Biden administration, the way they've played this, Congress has played this, and then obviously you've gotten a lot of criticism during this from Republican outlets and including the GOP Twitter account, just criticizing Joe Biden. There's a lot of he's weak and that's why this happened. So any of your domestic political analysis as to how the Biden administration's playing it and how it is playing out publicly?
The Biden administration has been thorough. It has, in that sense, with the tools it has available, been brilliant, and how it's brought other countries together, made this a unified reaction, and made Putin suffer consequences for invading another country. Now, that may not be satisfying to the crowd that wants to see gunfire met with bombs, right? Like that's the crowd. But that same crowd also does not necessarily want to put American troops in harm's way. So that's the needle to thread, right? And there's the horseshoe theory where left and right kind of end up meeting. It is the idea of the left not wanting to participate in American imperialism, the right saying that, this isn't strong enough, nothing's been done. And the center is largely probably a bit of where Reagan was, and Reagan would be turning over in his grave. Reagan was, the United States needs to be a beacon of light on a hill, like a shining example to the rest of the world of standing up for human rights and values. Now, Reagan, of course, also was providing CIA operatives to undermine governments around the world. But the rhetoric was there. The intervention in that was there. Reagan also did the immigration revamp and had the highest number of refugees in recent history, 185,000 people a year, right? Like that's nowhere near what Trump or Biden have been able to do. So the idea that this is happening because of Biden, I would push back and say it's actually happening because of Trump. Putin did not need to invade Ukraine because he had Trump undermining NATO and the alliance for him. Right? There was no cohesive military alliance with the head of the United States yelling on the world stage about how NATO was weak sauce, and there's no point in having that anymore. So I really do wonder on that front how that would play out had Trump been here in this moment and Putin decided to invade. But it's clear that there's been a divide among conservatives and now current staunch Republicans. Like, it is unreal to me that as anybody in this country, you would sit here and argue that Putin is in the right, that he is correct in what he is doing, and that it is okay to just roll in and take over another country, right? I'm like, okay, you're just showing yourself and what your own ambitions are. I'm like, are you looking to take over Mexico? Like, do you want to take over Canada? Like, what is that all about?
I know I got to let you go, but I want to ask you one more question because everybody, all eyes are on what's happening in Ukraine, the invasion. Putin's war is my editorial standard, Nayyera. I call it Putin's war. And everything else is falling by the wayside. But last Friday, we did have the first black woman ever nominated to the Supreme Court. And I want to know what your thoughts are around Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and her nomination, and what this means to you, what you think it means for the country.
So my channel has been leading with that story because it is a big deal to have the first black woman nominated and all that she brings to the table. It is a big deal to have potentially the third black person on the court. I mean, only 3 black people in all of U.S. history on the Supreme Court. The idea that because she is black, or you selected from a pool of black female applicants, that she's not qualified is absurd. She actually, of all of the potential draft picks, she is more qualified than Chief Justice John Roberts. She went to the same schools he did just as well as he did, it had the same jobs he did, even including the last court he was on. She's been on that court, except he served 2 years as a judge. She served 7 years as a judge on that court. So the qualifications are there. She also happens to be black. So when you hear this, the idea that she's unqualified or she's a radical leftist agenda and this and that, I'm like, well, what court opinions are you citing? What experience are you citing to make you think that, other than the fact that she's black? So I'm fascinated to see what this reveals in our country, but also what it reveals in Congress, namely that Senator Lindsey Graham voted for her to confirm her just a minute ago. So now she's not good enough. Like, you were fine with her when you were, confirming her for the court. So now what?
Are you concerned that for her situation, her confirmation, that several people could come out and accuse her of sexual harassment from the past? Are you concerned?
I am fully confident that if she were to yell and scream and spit during her confirmation hearing, the country would be in a meltdown.
Do you think
absolutely no way that she could behave in that confirmation hearing like Judge Kavanaugh did and get away with it?
Yeah, I don't think almost anybody could, really. It's hard to remember. It's hard to think about that all happened, and that he's at the Supreme Court, and that soon she will be, and I don't know how she'll contain her eye roll. She doesn't seem like a patronizing person, so maybe that doesn't occur to her, but it must be hard.
One of the things that they test for in terms of qualifications is, like, can you control your side eye as a woman on the court?
Yeah.
Do that. I would not. I mean, other reasons I don't qualify, but that immediately, no. There's zero facial control for me when I think there's stupid going on.
Which is why I love watching you on television. And which is why I love that we met on television, and I got to sit next to you while you sigh-eyed me.
You were all up in my space then, and we were fine. I'm going to come and crash your shed.
I look forward to it, and I really appreciate having you. And please come do this more often if you can ever fit it in.
I will. I would love to, because what we haven't talked about, which we need to get to, because I need your advice on that, is raising strong, fierce girls to turn into strong, fierce women.
I have some thoughts.
Next time.
All right. Isn't she the best? Isn't Nayyera Haq great? Don't you love that conversation? I hope you do. I so enjoyed it, and she's such a cool, smart, funny, down-to-earth person, and we have a great connection, and I hope that she will join me more. Watch her on the Black News Channel. Follow her on Twitter and let her know that you heard her here. Read all of her stuff, and always, I think, heed what she is saying. So much credibility, great analysis, and I just love talking to her. So please reach out and let her know how much you enjoyed having her on the show. She is on Twitter at Nayyera. It's at Nayyerroar. So Nayyera. Always hard. I wish she made that easier for us, but I also like the way it looks and sounds. Nayyera Hawk, thank you very, very much. All right, I got Bill B coming up now, and later on, Melissa Walker of the States Project, which was really great. Had a great conversation with her, so I hope you don't skip that interview, because it's super important, the work they're doing. I really want you to consider getting involved in supporting that organization. But first, a great conversation with the very relevant issue of what's going on in Ukraine. So Bill B in D.C., longtime caller, listener to the show. If you listen to this show regularly, you know him, and you probably think he's got a pretty good amount of credibility. I think what Bill does best is just take in information, synthesize it, and be able to regurgitate it. I mean, that's what I do. That's what a lot of people do. He's not necessarily a scholar or an expert on these issues, but he certainly sounds as good as so many of them that are, because he's been studying this stuff for years, and he's paying close attention. He's basically obsessed with it, and he's got all kinds of alternative sources that he talks to in person in those shadowy D.C. bars or whatever he's doing. Anyway, Bill B. in D.C. on Ukraine, our latest right now. Can you hear me?
I can. You're in DEFCON 5 radio voice. Yes.
Oh, I was only at DEFCON 3, so that's weird.
Really? Well, that's the problem with these sorts of confrontations,
The confusion.
Both sides can judge each other, yes.
Oh, no, I saw The Sum of All Fears with Ben Affleck. Isn't this exactly what that movie is about?
Yeah, I guess in a way.
Working back channels to make sure there's no nuclear war. Bill, is there going to be a nuclear war?
Not unless Clint Watts or who's the other guy?
Richard Engel and Clint Watts are asking the same question, and you and many others are slightly confused as to why they would be asking this question, which is some version of there's a convoy of Russian armored vehicles on their way into Ukraine. Why doesn't NATO just bomb them all, basically? And Richard Engel, for one, is like trending on Twitter as a result of this suggestion. You have gone at them both now on Twitter. How dare you attack my friend Clint Watts?
I really like him, and I think he's a really smart guy. I don't think he understands what he's talking about in this case at all.
Come on, he's a Russian expert.
Well, he's not a deterrence expert or a nuclear weapons policy expert, and he's not a military guy, as far as I know.
Well, he's former Army. I mean, he is former military.
Then he should be ashamed of himself right now. Seriously. I'm trying to let him off the hook, Pete. I mean, it's absurd what he's saying. What he's saying is we should do, take control of the air, which would be a combat air patrol, by the way. It wouldn't be like a gentle pushing aside of the Russians. We'd be shooting them down. And then he wants us to attack a 17-mile long convoy and kill, 5, 6, 10,000 Russian soldiers. And then he's like, but it doesn't need to escalate to anything beyond that, like a nuclear war. Like, give me a fucking break. That is ridiculous. And it's just stupid. And I get the emotion of the moment. And I do let him off the hook in the sense in that, at least unlike, Engel, he wasn't like soaking up every dumb thing the Pentagon told him for 20 years in Afghanistan. Engel, by the way, is doing exactly that right now. He's doing exactly what he did in Afghanistan. He's saying like, yeah, let's rah, let's like go for it. And then, of course, if it all turned to crap at the end, Engel then would say, like, how did the Biden White House mess this up?
Right. Well, it can't be coming from is it coming from the Department of Defense suggesting somehow that NATO forces, NATO equals America, right?
NATO does not just equal America, but we're certainly the leading power in NATO. I think I've said to you this before, the design of NATO, according to a British general back in the 1940s, was to keep the Russians out, to keep the Americans in, and to keep the Germans down. And that is a pretty good actual description of it. It was to make sure Germany didn't blow back up again like it had done twice already in the century. And it was to keep Russia from conquering the rest of mainland Europe. NATO right now is accomplishing that job pretty admirably. And it would be certainly the United States leading it. We're the biggest punch in NATO. We are the ones who could really go head to head with, Russian anti-air and survive and win. So you'd be talking about the United States attacking the Russian army, which is not right now attacking us. And it is not right now attacking NATO. So that is an aggressive escalation without any ifs, ands, or buts. And however much, and I am profoundly on the Ukrainian side, but us escalating to the point where Russia drops a nuke on Kiev or on Warsaw or worse certainly isn't any good for the Ukrainians either.
Well, if you're on the Ukrainian side, the argument could be made that the strategy that you are certainly supporting, and I think that most I don't know what category we would put in them, rational people are supporting, is you don't want to do something that can unify the opposition in this case or in any other type of case. It reminds me of 2009 with the Iranian revolution. Of course, President Obama wanted to be critical of the regime, but everybody knew that that would unify the divided Iranian people with that green revolution. I mean, experts were saying that the same would be the case here. If NATO planes bombed and killed thousands of Russians, Putin and state media would use that to unify the Russians who are at currently in danger of maybe starting to peel away from Putin and not support him. Isn't that basically a similar situation? Doesn't this happen all the time? It's so easy to say, we've got the plans, we've got the missiles, let's fucking bomb these people, but you don't think of what the next step would be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the question you should always ask yourself is what next? For instance, could we defend Tallinn or Riga within 3 weeks if we started bombing the Russians in Ukraine? Because the Russians could throw 10,000 men over that border and in 4 hours be in the capital of one of those places. And then you have to decide, okay, are we going to fight to get it back and risk them just nuking whatever rescue mission we send?
Right.
Right. I mean, you have to look at all of the possible decision trees the other guys could make that could make things a lot worse. And you do, Russia right now is in a situation where, for instance, Google Pay and Apple Pay, which were working on the Moscow subway on Friday, are now no longer working. Netflix is being turned off. Various other streaming services are being turned off because if you can't deal with the Russian state bank and you can't deal with Sberbank and a few others, then you can't do business with Russia, period. So they're starting to see, Shell Oil is pulling out. I think BP is giving up $25 billion in Russia to pull out. You have DHS and FedEx are no longer delivering packages to Russia. Russia is being frozen out of the modern world at light speed. And if Putin's going to give up, he's not, if Putin's going to survive this and thrive in it, it would be to give him something that he can replace all of that with. And of course, America fulfilling the exact thing he claims we would do and make it a war between NATO and Russia would solve that problem.
Right.
Solves that problem. Whereas if these people are going, holy shit, we are the aggressors, these plucky Ukrainians are kicking the shit out of us, and we're going to win on paper over time, but we're selling our souls. We're the Germans in 1941. That's a Russian actually said that, I believe, to Julia Yaffe.
I saw that report too. There's basically saying we're going to have to apologize for our nation's actions for the next generation, if not more, the way Germans had for the Third Reich.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many Russians, and I know a good number. I don't know a single one whose grandparents or great-grandparents didn't fight in the Great Patriotic War, right? Many of whom are part Ukrainian or fought in the Ukraine or had Ukrainian guys in the army. I mean, this is a fratricidal conflict, right? Ukraine is certainly a different country, but there's a lot of shared history. There's a lot of shared family.
Right.
And if we manage to intervene in a way that turns it away from that, we're idiots. And if we intervene in a way that makes the possibility of a nuclear war even sort of likely, we are absolute fools. And it doesn't, and by the way, it's that classic thing. I keep telling people, Putin could nuke Lviv tomorrow. It doesn't solve any of his problems, right? Well, us attacking Russia doesn't solve Ukraine's problems either. It would spread the war. It would make it worse. It would absolutely devastate Ukraine. The Russians aren't going to back down. They might actually escalate it to something worse. And unless you want to put 180,000 American troops into Ukraine to back all this up, aren't we smart enough yet to remember that fucking air power doesn't win wars?
When did air power not win wars? All the wars since...
I mean, air power on its own never wins a war. Right. Name one where it ever happened. It doesn't happen. And yes, we could damage the Russians terribly. They would probably, by the way, shoot down American planes, which you'd then have Americans, POWs in Russia. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's just, it complicates it. And it adds a layer of difficulty to the whole situation that doesn't do anyone anything.
It's hard to watch armored vehicles going into Ukraine and sit here and do nothing. I understand the impulse to want to stop them, but imagine being a Ukrainian member of the military told that while you're being shot at for the past several years, never fire back, fire back. That's so it's like Americans can't sit here and watch this happen without wanting blood, wanting action. But the Ukrainian military has been doing just that for years by not firing back, knowing that it will give Russia exactly what it's looking for.
That's right. And by the way, them not firing back, them holding their fire and being canny about how they dealt with the Russians is why the Russians are getting such a fucking bloody nose in the first 5 days.
Yes.
Right? The Russians underestimated them. The Russians thought they could go in with their VDV units and their special forces and the Wagner guys, and those guys got their ass kicked, even though they had a big preponderance of force. And is it hard to watch and not do anything? Sure. But you know what, folks? There's things you can do. You can give money. You can send aid. You can, go give money to the refugee organizations that are going to be helping.
You can sign up to fight. Didn't they create like a...
Yeah. And by the way, anyone who's going to tell you like we should be bombing things, get your fucking gear on. You can fly to fucking Poland and you can go fight.
Right.
The Ukrainians are starting Foreign Legion. If you really think that that's what people should do, that Americans should put their lives on the line to fight for Ukraine, then go do it. Right? I mean, you can. There's nothing stopping you. There's no law stopping you. So, there's things we can do, but there are things, the rational thing for us to do is to give aid, to get our country to give aid, which it is doing on an enormous level. I think the number now that they're talking about is $6.4 billion, which is going to fund not just refugee aid, but it's going to fund an insurgency against the Russians.
Yeah, that's directly from our country, not to mention aid coming from other countries as well. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, think about how wild this is. I don't have the dollar numbers from the EU countries, but Sweden is giving 5,000 anti-tank weapons. Denmark is giving about half that. Finland is. Luxembourg is giving 200. It's probably the only 200 they have. Everyone in Europe, with maybe the exception of Italy, is throwing arms at the Ukrainians, and they're throwing money, and they're throwing covert support, and they're throwing food, ammunition, everything. The Ukrainian insurgency, and there's a reason I'm saying that, which we'll come back to in a second, is going to get a ton of support. And I think that rather than the way everyone's looking at this like it's a fucking Marvel movie, and it really annoys me. They're making I saw this thing today where it's like, oh, Jeremy Renner would be really great to play Zelensky. The New York posted that today, and that's just nauseating. Zelensky is very likely to die fighting for his country. We shouldn't valorize him as some movie star because he's A, just an imperfect regular guy, but B, he's doing something outrageously heroic. But the American mentality is to immediately squash that into our culture and turn it into something that goes into Hollywood. It's gross.
Well, what were you going to say about a potential insurgency? You said come back to it.
So the Ukrainians are almost certainly going to lose Kiev. They're almost certainly going to lose Kharkiv. Okay. Zelensky has a very high chance of not surviving that process. The Russians are going to romp at least over the eastern 2/3 of the country. They're really going to control basically where their guns can fire, and that's about it. If the Ukrainians decide to keep fighting, then it's just a running, expensive, bitter sore for Putin as long as he is alive, right? That's going to be awful for the Ukrainians. There's going to be a lot of people dead. There's going to be starvation. There's going to be crushed cities, you name it. But that is where this is likely going. And we should have that in our heads that that's where this is going. There's not going to be a Hollywood ending. There's not going to be, a miraculous charge by the Ukrainians that makes the Russian army decide they're quitting, right? What's happening right now is that the Russian army has realized how badly they fucked it up, and they're reorganizing. And they're going to probably cut off Lviv. They're going to probably cut off Kiev, I should say. And they're going to probably cut off Kharkiv, and they're going to besiege them until they're gone. Okay. And they're going to then do that around the country. I mean, the Russia already can probably pretty much go where it wants to go in Ukraine. It just can't hold any ground. It's not literally on. And that's what the Ukrainians have to maintain. And that's going to be an ugly, bitter, violent, probably multi-year process. And we better get our minds there, because if 2 weeks from now, people like, Engel are on CNN saying like, well, I guess we lost this one. I swear to God, I'm going to go down there and punch him in the nose.
Engel is an NBC.
NBC, whatever. Yeah, sorry.
So what about the idea that you texted me earlier? I wanted to ask you about that. You were talking to an economist friend of yours.
Right.
That you said expected 20% decline over 12 months in the Russian economy.
Right.
The financial equivalent of going from Texas to Tennessee, which is really a mean thing to say. But regardless, I was actually surprised by how small that was. I understand how significant a 20% decline in a nation's GDP would be. But this is so much more than that. This is cutting off so much going into the country. You think about states not buying, liquor stores not buying Russian vodka, airlines not flying in. You can't get in or out. The banking system is frozen. Their money is worth hardly anything. Food, energy, like where are you getting 20% over 12 months? Like, it seems in day 4, Russians are already suffering, and Russia looks like it's going to be in terrible economic shape within a week.
So I would say that the 20%, and how I meant that was it would probably get there pretty quickly, but this year, not by the end of the year. Pretty quickly, they're going to be down about 20%. Their inflation is going to look more like 69%. The ruble right now is worth less than a penny. They're going to get crushed. And, so they're in a situation where their economy is much smaller. They don't have access to foreign currency. I think there was $20 billion in foreign currency in the whole country as of a couple of weeks ago of Russia. They owed to the banks owed to their depositors something like $200 billion worth of foreign currency. Half of that $20 billion that they had in those banks was already gone by Friday. So they're in a situation where in foreign currency, people are owed, still about 100 or 110. I'm sorry, more than that, close to 200 billion, and they're not going to be able to get their money out of the bank. So there's going to be bank closures. There's going to be, for bank quote unquote holidays. There's going to be really bad inflation, and there's going to be a real paucity of goods, right? Like beyond just regular inflation of things. You're not going to have an inflation of overbuying. You're going to have an inflation of people not being able to get things.
Right.
It's going to be almost a Soviet setup where only people with connections and tons of money and access to foreign currency are going to live well. It's a really bad situation. Now, I think it's easy to overestimate how easy it would be, or hard. It's easy to overestimate how easy it would be to get rid of Putin. He has done a very good job of sort of wiping out alternative power structures. But, so do most mafia bosses. And I think that this just general malaise and generally crushing economic situation is going to be really hard for him to survive in the long run, again. And I think that is the sort of American approach to this is crush his currency, crush his economy, and make everyone worried about food, job, kids' future. This, by the way, includes the big oligarchs who are, not politically super powerful, but, those big oligarchs include guys like the head of the intelligence service. It includes, some of the big military guys. These guys are looking at their chalet in Monaco that they're never going to get to again, or the $40 billion they've hidden away in Switzerland, which unbelievably Switzerland is seizing Russian money, which is like really mind-blowing to me.
Right. They've always been
They have
neutral.
become a pariah state. And I don't know if you've talked to anybody who has explained why this is so devastating for Russia. Russia keeps like 80% of its sovereign wealth in in G7 countries. So Russia had 630 billion or so that Putin was going to use to mitigate the effect of all these things. We just grabbed it all, and he can't use it.
He really didn't think that was going to happen. That's what I mean, or maybe
really
he did.
didn't.
But
so he's got about 60 billion renminbi in China, which is useful, but okay, whatever. You can use it for some things, but obviously China is not stupid, and they're going to exact their pound of flesh for that. To let him use it. Then he's got, I think it's 150 billion, in gold reserves, which he can only really sell to China. And the Chinese are going to say, well, we'll pay you 100 billion for it. Right? He's going to get still about 20 billion a month in energy sales, because those have been carved out in order to minimize the effect on Europe. So he's going to be in a situation where he's sort of got like an eyedropper to try to quench the thirst of this big country of 100 and whatever it is, 70 million people. And I just don't think in the end it works. And I also think it makes it incredibly hard for him to revitalize his military after this. He becomes, if he's stuck in a quagmire that's using up $1 billion a week, right, or $1 billion a month even, in the Ukraine, it's just he doesn't even have really that 20 billion anymore to help his foreign exchange problems at home. So he's really in a bad spot. And again, I'll go back to this is why us intervening militarily is so absolutely asinine. We've got him in a really good spot for us and for the Ukrainians in the long run. If we turn this into a big, Eastern European, ding dong with nukes, we're fools. We're giving up our advantageous position. So
I want to play a couple things, stupid things for you to respond to.
I love stupid things. Go.
This is Fox News' Pete Hegseth, former military guy himself, saying that the CPAC attendees that he talked to told him Putin's invasion of Ukraine, quote, pales in comparison to the wokeness of my culture. Listen to this.
What's happening in Ukraine is important, but it pales in comparison to the crime I see in my streets, to the wokeness I see in my culture, to the inflation I see at my pocketbook, to the real border I care about, which is the southern border, which is wide open. On every single issue, the quality of life of average Americans has gone down. I mean, the taxi driver I spoke to just yesterday said it cost me twice as much. He said, I didn't vote for Biden, but it cost me twice as much to fill up my tank every time I drive. I feel it, and I realize I was wrong. So the best thing Joe Biden could do on this grandest of stages with all eyeballs on him is admit some shortfallings, admit we aren't where we should be, and then course correct.
So he's talking about the State of the Union and what he should say, but the reason I played this clip is because it's representative of a lot of folks on the right that you're basically hearing say, I don't hate Putin as much as I hate the left, as much as I hate Joe Biden. You're even seeing the official Republican Party Twitter handle being critical of Biden, saying that he's weak and this is why Russia's aggression. And I just wanted to ask you the same question I've been asking a lot of smart people this week. What do you make of the fact that Republicans in America see Biden, Democrats, and the left as more of a threat to them than Putin is to Ukraine and the rest of the world?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Putin is a dyed-in-the-wool reactionary, right? He wants the Russian Empire back. He wants Russians to be the head of that empire. He's got an incredibly racist attitude about Ukrainians, and he was enormous racist about Obama. They are like Putin. I mean, let's just put it bluntly. They are reactionaries who are racist assholes, and they have this 19th century view of the world that is obviously evaporating before their eyes. America's not more unsafe, and it's not dangerous. And it, by the way, doesn't cost you double to fucking fill up your tank of gas. That's completely asinine and stupid, and just factually flat out wrong, right? But like Putin, they see the world as getting away from this sort of caste level hierarchical place where their group was dominant and had all the prestige.
Right.
And so fuck them, and they can go to Moscow and live there if they think that sort of world is all that great.
How about this one? Did you hear about Pat Robertson coming out of retirement on the 700 Club?
I didn't hear I saw the quote, but I didn't hear the
All
tape.
right, I got it for you. I'm going to try to play see if I can last the whole minute, 20 seconds. But if you call for me to stop it, I'll stop it.
Okay.
You can't take it anymore, say, I just can't take it anymore. Here it is. Here he is, your father, Pat Robertson.
I think you can say, well, Putin's out of his mind. Yes, maybe so. But at the same time, he's being compelled by God. He went into the Ukraine, but that wasn't his goal. His goal was to move against Israel ultimately. And God is getting ready to do something amazing, and that will be fulfilled.
Okay.
Oh, it's that millennial, I don't mean young kids. I mean people who have crazy ideas about religion and think the end of the world is coming. That is his millennial. Let's call it millenarian, just to be clear. It's his millenarian. We have to, take back Israel from the Jews, obviously, who are evangelicals.
They never say that.
Yeah, they always leave that out, right? So yeah, he's an extremist lunatic. And by the way, Putin is not religious at all. Doesn't have a religious bone in his body. The man is cynic to the tips of his toes and to the core of his bones. So yeah, Pat Robertson.
What's this? Hold on a second. He's trying to get back in here.
And what Putin is doing by moving as he is to set up Ukraine as a staging ground for one of the armies, and then across is Erdogan at Turkey, and you've got between them that little Dardanelles area, and it's going to happen. So I just say that is what's coming up. Is Putin crazy? Is he mad? Well, perhaps. But God says, I'm going to put hooks in your jaws, and I'm going to draw you into this battle.
What's he saying now? What's God doing?
I get all caught up on the little Dardanelles area. It sounds almost like a sexual proclivity of some sort. But he seems to think that Putin is just going to magically leap from the Ukraine all the way into Turkey and then Israel, and he's basically just repeating the names of places he's heard of.
How come? And it's so infuriating when this guy who can just keep seeming to evade his own end times tells people what God is saying and doing and wanting. What's that called when you are interpreting God as if you are
prophecy?
What is it?
That's in the Christian tradition. They would call that prophecy. In the Catholic Church, they would call that fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, but he's always he has been predicting things for his entire career, and he's so often wrong. At what point does he stop? Does he not talk anymore?
People don't go to him to be right. They go to him for a sense of certainty and comfort and affirmation of their own sense that they are the elect in the future times, because they probably live in a crappy house outside of Columbus, South Carolina, and don't have a lot of prospects. I mean, and I'm not saying that in a cruel way. I know. Probably suck, I mean, I feel bad for them, but that's why they go to him. Marx had one thing right some of the time when he said religion is the opiate of the masses. I mean, that dude's fentanyl.
Is he? You're giving him a lot of credit with fentanyl, huh?
I mean, I think he's deadly in small doses.
Let's go back to Ukraine. Here is one more clip I wanted to play for you. This is the, so what is it? The UN had an emergency Security Council meeting today.
Right.
And in New York at the United Nations. And this is the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations. I'll try to pronounce his name. Sergei Kilstilsya. Anyway.
Perfect.
He says that if Putin wants to kill himself, he doesn't need to use the nuclear arsenal. He can do what the guy in Berlin did. Listen to this.
We have been prompted to call for an emergency special session as the level of the threat to the global security has been equated to that of the Second World War, or even higher, following Putin's order to put and alert Russian nuclear forces. What a madness. If he wants to kill himself, he doesn't need to use nuclear arsenal. He has to do what the guy in Berlin did in a bunker in May 1945.
Okay, Bill, what do you... These Ukrainian guys are tough. And women.
They are very tough. I went down to Lafayette Park, was talking to some friends of mine, some Ukrainians I know. They are a salty, salty crew. And I'll tell you, the UN ambassador to the UN the other day, I guess today, actually, he got in front of that session and he said, at the end of the Soviet Union, Russia was just given the USSR seat on the Security Council and in the UN. Now, by the rules of the UN, you're supposed to have a vote on that. And he said, I just want everyone in this room to raise your hand if your country voted for Russia to take the USSR seat. And nobody raised their hand because there's never been a vote. And he said, so I think we need to talk about the fact that Russia has a seat it never legally or legitimately was given.
Right.
And I got to tell you, it's really smart, actually. It's super smart. And I have to tell you, 2 weeks ago, I would have said, whatever. That's just, it's clever and it's funny, but there's no way anything happens with that. Today, I mean, Pete, we have seen the biggest geopolitical pivot in our lifetimes, and I'm including 9/11 in that.
Yeah.
This is the biggest geopolitical pivot ever. Germany just threw away 35, 40 years of policy. Finland and Sweden are very likely, I would say, to join NATO. The European countries are openly delivering arms to someone Russia is fighting and basically saying, fuck you if you don't like it. Right? They're not surreptitiously sliding arms into Ukraine. And Poland is giving them, I believe, up to 30 MiG-29s. Those planes are not going to be put on a train and brought into Western Ukraine. They're going to be flown from Poland into Western Ukraine. That is astonishing. And by the way, sort of gets at the point of do we really want to go to the point of having our planes bombing this convoy when we're already doing some things that are really escalatory, seriously escalatory? And this is a different world. And it wouldn't surprise me if the UN maybe looked at throwing Russia off the Security Council, which would be amazing and would be shocking. And it would be a reordering of how the world works.
What else are you hearing, seeing, observing over the past couple of days? So without any kind of predictions on what's next, what other stories are you, anecdotal or otherwise? And by the way, how do we know about the reporting when it said, I woke up this morning, they said 352 Ukrainian civilians dead. I read 4,500 Russian soldiers dead, which I don't believe, but I have no idea how such numbers are ever, by the way, reported in any conflict, any war. Sure. They're never that accurate. But in this case, obviously reporting has gotten to some extent easier, but it's also easier to manipulate.
That's correct. And the Ukrainians are manipulating the hell out of it in an amazing way. I mean, the two things I would say. Number one, what I'm looking at is how Russia, which had dominated the information warfare world up until a couple months ago, first the Biden administration just knocked them on their ass before the war started, and now the Biden administration and the Ukrainians are crushing them on the information war, crushing them, and that's including propaganda. Which, by the way, as Churchill said, the first casualty in any war is the truth, right? But propaganda can be used for good ends. And if it's to keep the morale of the Ukrainians up, to keep fighting, that's a good thing.
Right.
The Russians are getting destroyed on that field right now. I would say that the thing that I'm watching, because I think that the Russians are going to get better organized, they're going to figure out a lot of their problems, and they're going to really start moving on the centers of resistance, which is the cities. I really think that where we are right now is in an ammunition and supply race. Ukrainians have also fired off a lot of ordnance, and they have a lot of supply problems themselves. And I think that it's going to be a question of, if the Russians are really legitimately stopped from taking Kiev, it will be because the Ukrainians outsupplied the Russians at that location. And even then, there's no guarantee. I think you'd still have to say the Russians eventually take what is left of that city. So I'm looking at sort of that. I'm seeing if the Ukrainians can perform what would amount to a miracle and resupply their arms and armies and feed them and keep them in the field fighting as organizations rather than as an insurgency. That's what I'm saying. And if that happens, that would be a miracle on the order of, I don't know, Vanderbilt winning the NCAA a couple of years ago or more. It's crazy. That would be a crazy miracle. But those things have happened. In 1921, the Poles destroyed the Russians in a battle called the Miracle on the Vistula. And I'm telling you, no one ever imagined that could happen. So I'm not counting it out, but I really think that this is far more likely to end up as an insurgency. And I'm just really curious, do the Russians get stuck in the mode they're in now for another month, 2 months, 3 months? If they are, they're in such a world of hurt. And even if they're not, even if they manage to break these cities down in the next 7 days, they're still in a world of hurt. It's just not as extreme. So that's sort of what I'm watching. And I'm hoping that the emotions of the moment in Washington and in other places don't take over, and that somebody does not do something really stupid.
Yeah.
And by the way, one last thing. We are almost certain to have some sort of cyber warfare go on. I think that's highly likely.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, as I told you before, like Google Pay and Apple Pay not working on the subway or pretty much anywhere else in Russia at this point, Putin's going to feel the need to strike back. And I think that it's just...
Is that a result of some kind of interference from a foreign country, cyber warfare? Is that why they're not working?
No, it's sanctions.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
Sanctions. It's just that Apple saying,
right,
we're not going to get hit with all kinds of fines.
I wonder, by the way, my question is, how long does Apple, how long does Google, Aeroflot, UPS, DHS, how long do they stop doing business with Russia? I mean, you see this kind of thing happen here in America and around the world where as the world stops paying attention, commerce starts to slowly move back. I mean, if there's
they
not
have a choice.
Go ahead.
They have no choice.
What do you mean?
They have no choice at all. Because the sanctions on Russia are such that it's not worth doing business there. You end up getting you get sanctioned as a company yourself. So this is not one of those cases where they say, 3 months from now, we'll start to go back in. It's literally, I mean, to give you a sense of how brutal this is for companies, BP is leaving $25 billion on the table. Shell is leaving, I think, $10 billion. They're walking away from that kind of money because it's not worth it to violate the sanctions regime.
Got it.
Yeah. So this is different. This is very, 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 very different. We're at a hinge in history right now. And, if it goes on for 10 years in Ukraine, sure, I could see things changing a bit. But I just think this is the Spanish Civil War of our era, but like on steroids.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, Spanish Civil War, there were kind of three sides, right?
I don't know.
Like the British and the French were held off quite a bit because there was a large sort of Russian Bolshevik anarchist influence in the Republican movement in Spain. So it's basically the fascists versus those folks with Britain and France trying to stay sort of neutral. In this case, it's the fascists versus everybody and anybody. I mean, it's so crazy in Ukraine that right-wing weirdo fascists in Europe are going to fight the Russians. Right? Like it's become fashionable even in the right wing in Europe to fight the Russians, even though they actually agree with Putin in many ways. So this is a whole different deal. This is I'm rarely shocked, and that I talked about this a lot, and my predictions turned out to be pretty good. I'm still blown away at how this has turned out.
Yeah. So, well, we'll see what happens next, and we'll continue to talk with you. I really appreciate you taking the call and letting me press record. Everybody always loves how you're able to synthesize all this information and give us your take on it all. It's always great.
Yeah.
Thanks, pal.
Next year in Moscow, man. Next year in Moscow.
What's happening next year in Moscow?
Oh, Putin will be gone. We'll do the show there then.
Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to you setting that up with your people.
Excellent. Yeah, talk to my people. They are, they're me, basically, but cool.
Thanks, man.
Awesome. Have a good one.
All right, there he goes, at Bill B in D.C. Let him know you heard him here on the show. He does it for free. He is a really good guy. He's a businessman. He runs parking garages down there in D.C. If you need a place to park, reach out to Bill in D.C. We should all go down there and hang out, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we do something in D.C.? Wouldn't that be fun? All right, well, yeah, maybe we could have a hangout and then have an action of some sort. We could do some kind of an action. Would that be cool? I don't know. All right, do you have any ideas? Let me know. Where are we going to meet? Come on, the pandemic's over, right? Almost, maybe. Can we meet this summer? Can we do something? My next guest comes from the Twitter feed of Andrea Chalupa, because this is where I heard of this organization. It's the States Project. It's a really interesting organization, which I think is a great idea. They strike at the root of what the problem is to create lasting progressive change in this country. And I read all about them. I vetted them. They connect the importance of state legislatures to every aspect of our lives and bring together communities to help build a healthy, sustainable, and prosperous future for all. Statesproject.org. They decided to have me talk to Melissa Walker, who's a really interesting woman. She herself is really accomplished as a writer. She's published like 11 novels, and a couple of years ago, back in 2016, she decided she wanted to do something a little bit different with her life and get involved in organizing and activism. You can find her on Twitter, by the way, at Melissa C. Walker, and you can read all about her teen novels that she's written. But now she's the director of the Giving Circles Initiative at States Project, which you got to check it out. We learn all about it from her and how to get involved. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Melissa Walker of the States Project right now for the first time on Stand Up. All right, there she is, Melissa Walker. Really excited to talk to somebody from your organization, statesproject.org. I've just told everybody all about it, but real quick, I just want to learn a little bit about you before we talk about the work that you guys are doing. How did you get involved with this?
Gosh, I have a strange path to involvement here. So I am someone who comes from publishing. I write young adult and middle grade novels. And that is what I was doing in the fall of 2016 when I suddenly felt the urge to do something else and get really involved. So I actually attended a publishing holiday party in December of that year where I heard then New York State Senator Daniel Squadron speak. And that was the thing that just turned everything around for me and got me involved in state legislatures specifically.
What was it that he said? I mean, whenever I hear somebody say, "Oh, I saw this talk," or "You should watch this," it really affected me. I'm always very interested in what that thing was. How do you activate someone the way that whatever he said did to you that day?
Yeah, great question. So he actually said, we were in a room, there were probably 50 or 60 of us there. And he said, this room that we're in right now could raise the resources and bring the attention to change the balance of power in a state chamber this year. And I was like, what does he mean? Number one, like, how is that possible? And number two, to be honest, I was kind of like, what's a state chamber? Because I realized that evening, and as I rode home in the cab that night, I looked up who my state senator was and who my state assembly person was in New York, and I had never heard of them.
Right.
And I started to understand that this was an area where I hadn't been looking and where the things that he had talked about that night made me want to look. Because that night he talked about how everything that we were all worried about and everything that we cared about that might happen under a Trump presidency, those things were actually being decided in state capitals and not in Washington, D.C. So he talked about healthcare and education policy, environmental work, choice, and of course, the very core of our democracy, voting rights and gerrymandering, the drawing of the district lines that decide who goes to Congress. So I started to kind of connect the dots and realize, like, oh, I think I should have some eyes on Albany. And maybe I should start to understand how the rest of these state capitals work and what they're actually doing.
It's such a great story. And I think to me, it identifies what the problem is. The problem is that we don't have media outlets that cover local ongoings, the town, the county, much less the state. What we do have is national media outlets that do maybe a decent job, depending on what you look at, whether it's TV or radio. But from, NPR to CNN to the Washington Post, they cover national, or as we now are learning, obviously international issues. But who's telling you what's happening in your community? There's just, those resources don't exist. They're very, very hard to, make any kind of money being a local reporter. I just wanted to ask you just your question. I know you live in New York, so obviously there's a lot of media coverage there, but how important do you think it is at the state level for there to be someone telling the story about what's happening at the town hall meeting or in the chamber?
I think it's absolutely essential. And you're right. There has been a decimation of local media, and we continue to remain focused on what the national media covers, which, of course, is Washington, D.C. And I think that even when local media is able to rise up, people aren't connecting the dots on who's really pulling the power levers.
Right.
So there were a few examples that I thought of, honestly, right after that 2016 meeting, because I started to realize I grew up in North Carolina, and I started to recognize that that the bathroom bill, which had passed in North Carolina, I started to realize, oh, that was Raleigh. That was lawmakers in Raleigh who did that. And then I thought about the Stand Your Ground gun law that passed in Florida and let Trayvon Martin's murderer go free. And then it passed in 25 other states. And I started to realize, oh, that's lawmakers in Tallahassee, part-time folks who go to Tallahassee to decide these things. And I thought about Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis and realized, that's a Lansing problem, not a Washington, D.C. problem. And all of those things happened under an Obama presidency, but that's because the power lever was in state legislatures.
Now, your point is absolutely right. I think the question is not only do we not have a journalist at City Hall or in the State House doing great work, certainly not enough of them, and if any, in some towns, but you also have to do the investigative journalism to find out where the moneyed interests are, who the special interests are in your town and in your state to pass some law. And you mentioned Florida and Stand Your Ground laws. And even, I don't know, less obscene example would be the fact that when you look at Florida, you wonder why isn't there an incentive for solar power? And so then, you have the journalists that are covering the special interests of Florida Power and Light and their funding of politicians much. And so the point, I'm just trying to illustrate the point even more specifically on how important the money is to follow, even if you had great journalism. So great point. So your organization is dealing with the issue here that we're talking about. On the website, it says over the past 40 years, radical right wing has invested millions of dollars to build and hold state governing majorities. And we see the terrible impact of that investment every day. And so you say it starts in the states. And Melissa, the other point is specifically it starts with majorities. Explain what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in each state, there's a party that's in power, and the right wing has really been organizing for power in state capitals for decades. And from 2010 to 2016, Democrats lost nearly 1,000 state legislative seats as we stared at Washington, D.C. and felt good about the direction that our country was moving in. And understanding that this was, a real concerted effort on the part of the right, something called Project Red Map, in fact, which is a really obvious name for what they were trying to do. In those states where Republicans took over, where really the radical right wing took over majorities in state senates and state houses, they made people's lives bad. They defunded education. They put in right to work laws.
They made people's lives worse. The vast majority of some people's lives got much better, very few, but most people's lives are made worse. And your organization and the progressive movement in general wants to make people's lives better. It's like, if you want to have a binary, it's that simple. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're absolutely right. And the thing is that when people's lives got worse in those states, because as we've talked about, the decimation of local media, they didn't say, oh, that must be my state senator. Let me go down to Main Street and have a meeting with that person, because nobody really knows who their state senator is, or maybe even that they have one. And so you blame what you can see, you blame Washington, D.C., and you hit the change button for something like Trump. And the truth is that, little did we know the roots of Trumpism were being seated in state legislatures and the policies that were coming out of there. And so these are real power centers. And again, it's those kitchen table issues that we've mentioned. And it is also a tool of federal power, because state legislatures decide who can vote and when and when to purge the rolls and when to close polling sites and all of those things. And they decide, whether to put in voter suppression laws, which many states have done, and a great example actually is in Virginia, where a new majority took over in 2019, and they passed their own Voting Rights Act. Virginia is a southern state that has its own Voting Rights Act. It doesn't need federal legislation to come in. And they've made Election Day a holiday in Virginia, which means a lot more people can vote. And that changes things not only for Virginia, but for the national elections too. So we should all care about what's happening in states that are outside of our own as well.
Yeah, you hear more about these states in media when they do cover it, when there is a thin majority, and this election or that election could change the paradigm in that state. But that's the number one, focusing on majority makers, because the candidates that are in the closest races who can shift power to build majorities and improve lives is what it says. That's how the game changes. And so it's about making a smart investment with your time and your money into those races and not into races that don't matter as much. And that's the work that you guys are doing, which is identifying those races. And so the other thing that you do is you reach voters where they are. And we should mention the States Project has had some successes already. So if you want to talk about them, but how do you do this? I'm trying to do this in my town. There's more Democrats, registered Democrats, than there are Republicans in my town, but way more Republicans come out. How on earth can I find these, I'm going to say 30-year-old whites? I'm going to call them 30-year-old whites. They might have little kids. They just moved here like we did. They're not involved. They don't give a shit. They have no idea how important the Board of Education is going to matter.
Yeah. So, what gives me a lot of hope on focusing on state legislative races, especially these tipping point races, the ones that we need, like you said, to take majorities in these states, is that these are races that can be, that are won by very narrow margins, and you can use non-scalable tactics in these races. And that is something that we work on very closely with folks when we get involved. So one of those non-scalable tactics, and I think this kind of speaks to reaching voters where they are, is the candidate themselves knocking on doors. It's a really important lens for our work. It's something that we track when we go into a state, because a candidate knocking on a door is the thing that can cut through national conversation. It can cut through negative mailers that are coming out or digital ads. Because when you meet someone and you see them face to face and you see that they're running for an office and they're talking to you about the cracks in your sidewalk or the traffic problem in your district, then this is a person who I know who lives in this district. And so that to us has been a really important lens on how to win these races. And it brings things back to, these non-scalable tactics that can really, really move the needle. And especially when state legislative races are often won by a couple thousand votes or a few hundred votes. We have won races in the past that have been as close as 14 votes is the one that comes to mind right now. So to know that we're playing in that type of district and those types of races means that every person who gets involved in our work really has a chance to be someone who moves the needle. And there are states where we are very close to taking the majority. And it's kind of surprising in certain ways. Arizona is a great example of this. People think of Arizona as like a pretty red state that has a right-wing, honestly, a radical right-wing majority. And that is true. But in each chamber in Arizona, we are only one seat away from stopping the unchecked power of the right wing. And we are 2 seats away from creating new majorities in both chambers in Arizona. And those are races that in 2020, the Arizona State House was decided by 1,028 votes.
Wow.
So these are places where people can really plug in. And I think folks, you're right, are used to looking at national races, and they're used to looking at Senate races and congressional races. And those are huge. And they also cost millions and millions of dollars. So this is a sentence that I like to say, which is, it's often cheaper to change the balance of power in a state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. So if you think about that and the return on investment of looking at targeted state legislative races to try to build new majorities, I think people can see that they might not want to work on a Senate campaign that might have, as Sarah Gideon's campaign did in 2020, $15 million left over after the race. That's a lot of emotional giving that happens.
And she lost.
And she lost.
Just to be clear, in case anybody, the point of that was this woman, this candidate got a tremendous amount of attention. She running against Susan Collins in Maine. Was that right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
She, for a lot of good reasons, she got a lot of attention. She's seemingly a great candidate, attractive in every possible way, I think, as a politician. And so money poured in, and yet she lost. And what you're saying is, for so much less, you could have created actual lasting change at the state level. Let me ask you, though, real quick, because I think this is important when I'm trying to inspire and motivate people to get involved. That's more, why I do a segment like this with someone like yourself. And I think one thing that really is helpful is for you, in this case, to share kind of your own personal experience, because I think when people hear about this work, it sounds like work, and it also sounds like maybe losing work. Maybe you put all this work into it and you lose. My experience has been, I've made a ton of new friends, and it can be really fun. And I'm just wondering if you might share what your experience has been, because when I think about you, and I don't know much about you, if you're a children's book novelist, you're writing. You're mostly alone, and you're creative. But now you're really engaging in your community and with other people. It must be a real major life change for you. And I wondered if you might share with folks how it's affected, because it's not bad. It's not work the way it sounds like.
No, it's not. And that's a great question. So, I originally started doing this. I formed the first giving circle for the States Project. Well back before I started working at the States Project. And I did it with other children's book authors. And we got together and we started gathering in living rooms and talking about why state legislatures matter, all the things that we had learned and were continuing to learn along the way. And it's been a very social moment for me, certainly. I mean, I think my inner introvert is like crying in a corner somewhere and would really like to go back to writing novels. But I find that this is absolute therapy for me, because when I watch what's happening in our country, I mean, it is very disturbing, and I don't think I could block it out by writing children's books. And I really need to do something, and I really needed to do something very tangible. And that's why I got involved in this work. And once I started talking to people, when I started consulting with the States Project and trying to get more folks to do giving circles, it was honestly because in 2017, with our first giving circle, we went into Virginia with the States Project and we supported 10 candidates, 9 of whom won their seats. And when the majority in Virginia shifted that much, it was just 1 seat away from establishing a new majority. Virginia expanded Medicaid right after that. And 400,000 people got health care who hadn't had it before. And my giving circle felt really connected to that outcome. And like we had seen this change happen, and a lot of it, had to do with our work. It felt so tangible. And so I went back to that New York State senator who I'd originally heard speak at the holiday party, because he had started the States Project and we had worked with him on this giving circle. And I said, I want to meet all the other people who heard you speak and did these giving circles. And he was like, well, it's not that many. And I was like, oh no, this is the most impactful thing I've ever done. This is the most powerful I've ever felt. And I want more people to feel that way. And honestly, I started going around in New York, where I live, to cafes where people were writing postcards to voters and to places where people were phone banking. And I said, keep doing this. This is awesome. Can I also talk to you about how you can flip a state chamber? Because that is important too. And it's been a huge sustainer for me. And I will tell you this too. Giving Circles, the program that I run, is about raising the electoral dollars that we need to build these new majorities. And a couple weeks after I started working at the States Project, a friend said, oh, how's the fundraising gig going? And I was like, I'm not fundraising. I'm flipping state legislatures. And she's like, boo, like a fundraising, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, am I fundraising? Because what was happening when I walked into rooms and when I talked to people about this was that I was coming in and thinking to myself, I'm going to tell them about a level of government that they have not thought about and that they have not been paying attention to. And then I'm going to tell them how much their involvement can impact that level of government, how foundational it is to our country, and how important it is that they get involved. And then I would leave the room and I would think, you're welcome. And that's still how I feel, because most people still aren't quite paying attention to state capitals. And shining a light there has become a real mission for me, for the States Project, and for our Giving Circle leaders who have joined us and started to see this. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. So I still have friends who, for example, when the Texas abortion ban passed, started talking to me about, oh, that Ted Cruz. And I was like, this isn't about Ted Cruz. It has nothing to do with him. These are lawmakers in Austin who are going to the Capitol, who officially meet only once every 2 years and do things as consequential as this. So let's start looking there. And when people look there, they start reading the news a different way. They start talking to their families a different way. They start asking everyone they know, do you know who your state representatives are? And it becomes like a real place where people can plug in.
So well said. I really appreciate that. It's really interesting. Before I do let you go, I want to just, about these giving circles. It says here that it's you sit around a fire naked and you put money in a basket, and then certain candidates, which sounds uncomfortable a little bit to me. What am I missing?
Well, to each their own. Giving circles operate in whatever way they'd like to.
There's a fire and everybody comes, they bring their credit cards.
Giving circles are, leadership team that can start with one person, 2 people, a leadership team of 5 people coming together and saying, yes, I'd like to plug into state legislatures and choose a target state. So when they form, the first thing they talk about is why state legislatures. So that's what we've been talking about a lot today. Like, when you start to talk to folks about your political thing that you're doing and it's state legislatures, it requires like a few more sentences because people are like, what do you mean? What's going on?
Right.
So that's the first part of the story. And then we do have target states, and those are states that we think where a power shift is possible in the coming year. And on our website, you can find our target states. And each giving circle, once they form, has the opportunity to choose which state they'd like to target. And 100% of the amount raised by the Giving Circle goes out the door to those states. So that's been an important part of our program, and it's something that folks really appreciate. And when those Giving Circles form and then choose a target state, they start to learn all about that target state. Sometimes they're in the target state, obviously, the folks who are forming it. Sometimes they're next door or outside, or they have a connection to the state. But in each case, it's a state where a change is possible. And it's a state where we're really working on specific targeting to make that happen.
That's really important. In each state, it's a state where change is possible. And the website is super helpful because it tells you what the balance of power is in the state house of Florida, Maine, Montana, all these other states that you're raising money in. And then there are also links there about news stories about this, and then kind of a timeline. And I can't tell you how helpful it is. Statesproject.org. And I love it. Melissa, before we wrap up, people that are listening, they want to get involved. I would just tell them to go to the website based on our conversation and learn about these different states. But what would the message be to folks listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So statesproject.org is a great place to plug in. Our team is here to answer questions and talk to folks along the way. And absolutely, that's where they should go. That's where you can start a giving circle if you're interested in that, or find out more about giving circles. It's a really, really tangible way to plug into the work. You can also sign up for our mailing list and kind of learn more about us if you're ready to do that. And we would be so excited to bring more people to the work.
I'm ready to do that. I will start there with the mailing list. I'm not one of these people. I get so much email from all the politicians. Everybody's emailing me now. It's like these whiny people that progressives, I'll say, that are so annoyed by all of the email they get. And you think about, the civil rights era, and you think about the people whose shoulders that we stand on to try to create change. And my email's so clogged up, like it's like complaining about getting an injection. Like, oh, do I really have to do this to save the world? Yeah, it's the simplest thing. Really is the simplest thing. Sign up now for the email. Melissa, sorry for ranting at people that aren't you, hopefully, but.
No, it's okay. And I will say that's one thing that's cool about giving circles, actually, because if your friend starts a thing, it's really a community, and you're talking to your friends. You're doing it together. You're maybe reading a book and having a book club that talks about state power. You're starting to understand this new thing together. One of my Giving Circle leaders said the best thing. She said, okay, cool. We're a Giving Circle. We set a goal. We meet our goal. Now we're a learning circle, and we're all coming together to like focus on this thing and really learn about this foundational power. So it's a good thing.
Awesome that you are on board. I'm really excited to go learn more about your work as a novelist too. You've written eight books, is that right?
10, actually. Ooh. I've got 10 out there. Yep.
Wow, what a dream to come true. Who decides they're going to write books and then writes and publishes books? You're a pretty big deal.
Oh, thanks, Pete.
Yeah, thank you very much for talking to me, Melissa. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to getting more involved in the future.
Thank you very much. This was a pleasure.
Melissa Walker, everybody. Check her out. Giving Circles at the States Project. At Melissa C. Walker on Twitter. MelissaCWalker.com. Please let her know that you heard her here on the show. And that was awesome. It was a great conversation and an awesome organization that I definitely want to follow and be more connected with. And I hope that you will reach out to them as well. All right, that's it for today. But what a show, huh? A great news recap. You got Nayyera Haq, Bill B in D.C., and Melissa Walker. 3 guests. How do I do it? I don't know. It's a lot of work. I put in a lot of time here in the shed today. Try to be relevant and be as enlightening as I can with you here. And I always want to hear from you. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and sign up for a paid subscription or raise your subscription up if you want. Right now, go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And I will talk to you tomorrow and Thursday night at the Hangout and anytime on the Discord platform. Subscribe to the YouTube page. That's youtube.com/standupwithpete. And that is it. John Carroll singing us out right now. Love you. Bye-bye.
You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.